So, in my last two videos, I went through every NBA team, identifying the player on each roster I believed was the most overrated in the eyes of fans and media alike, so for my next two videos, I'm going to be doing something similar. The difference, though, is that we're now going to the opposite end of the spectrum, by going through each team identifying their most underrated players. These are the players who are helpful, productive, and impactful in their team's rotations, but don't quite get the level of respect that they deserve for it to varying degrees. In this video, we'll be going through the teams in the Eastern Conference, and then in tomorrow's video we'll be finishing up the list by going through the teams in the Western Conference, so stay tuned for that as well. Before we start though, it turns out a good amount of you who are watching aren't subscribed to the channel, so if you enjoy the content, consider hitting the subscribe button, as not only does it help out a ton, but I'd also very much appreciate it. Now with that being said, let's begin. We'll be going in alphabetical order, so to start off we have the Atlanta Hawks, and their most underrated player right now is Onyeka Okongwu. The Hawks have had a relatively disappointing season as a whole for a variety of reasons, and they haven't taken the leap defensively that they were hoping to take after their offseason, but at the very least, they are much better in that regard when Okongwu is anchoring the defense and on the court. He's still coming off the bench backing up Clint Capella, but the team actually performs 4 points better when Okongwu is on the court, and may need to start to have a bigger role moving forward, because his versatility on defense is becoming integral to their success. Next up is the Boston Celtics, and their most underrated player is Al Horford. Horford had a few down seasons, and the majority of the basketball world started to assume that his days impacting the game at a high level were over, but this season he has been outstanding, even if his box score production doesn't jump off the page at you. Horford is back anchoring a top 5 ranked Boston defense, he's playing his role without trying to do too much, and he's shooting the ball better than he ever has, knocking down 45% of his threes. Up next we have the Brooklyn Nets, and their most underrated player is Mikal Bridges. Bridges had been pretty underrated since his time in Phoenix when he was used more in a role of a 3-and-D wing player, but ever since he got traded to Brooklyn, he has stepped into the role of being the team's #1 option on offense, and has taken off. In the 20 games that he has played as a member of the Nets, he is averaging about 27 points, shooting the ball 50% from the field and 41% from 3, so he very well may be a legitimate star in the making. Next up is the Charlotte Hornets, and their most underrated player is Mark Williams. There are a ton of talented rookies emerging from this most recent draft class, but Williams hasn't quite gotten the recognition that others have, despite showing off very promising potential. He struggled a bit with injuries this season, but when he's been on the court, his size and defensive instincts have been on display as a rim protector, he's established a good rapport with LaMelo Ball in the pick and roll, and he finishes well inside, looking like a legitimate starting center in the making. Up next is the Chicago Bulls, and their most underrated player is Alex Caruso. Caruso is another role player who may not have his numbers jump off the page at anybody, but his impact goes beyond the box score. He's an outstanding defender whose hustle is vital to a Bulls team that lacks good defensive output overall. He gives you a little bit of everything offensively without trying to do too much, and the Bulls perform over 7 points better with him on the court for a reason compared to when he's on the bench. Next up is the Cleveland Cavaliers, and their most underrated player is Darius Garland. When discussing the success of the Cavaliers this year, a lot of the talk tends to center around the arrival of Donovan Mitchell, along with their stout defense being led by Evan Mobley and Jarrett Allen in the front court, but Garland has been a vital playmaker for the 4th place team in the East. He didn't make the All-Star team this year, but he's putting up about 22 points and 8 assists a night, he's turning it over less, and he's knocking down his shots very efficiently, shooting 47% from the field and 41% from 3. Next up is the Detroit Pistons, and their most underrated player is Jalen Duren. Duren is another rookie center that has incredible upside on display, but again is in a situation where very few people are taking note of it. Unfortunately, the Pistons have a pretty crowded front court and just added James Wiseman to throw into the bunch, but Duren is probably the best defensive player of the group, and he's a tremendous athlete that runs the floor well, finishes strong inside, and has the length to hold his own with any matchup. Up next, we have the Indiana Pacers, and their most underrated player is Miles Turner. Turner used to be a player that was labeled as a guy with potential all-star ceiling, but his offensive game never quite developed to that point. He's also been on the trade block seemingly every year for the last 5 years, and now that he's on a tanking Indiana team, he's been forgotten about by many, but despite not quite living up to the hype, he's still a fantastic rim protector and now an underrated offensive big man. He's scoring a career-high 18 points this year, he capably spaces the floor out to the three-point line, and he's amongst the league leaders in blocks yet again. Next up is the Miami Heat, and their most underrated player is Bam Adebayo. Bam Adebayo might legitimately be the best defensive player in the NBA, but he not only has yet to win a Defensive Player of the Year award, but he also hasn't even been a finalist for the award yet, and to top it off, he was only named second team All-Defense last year. The Heat's biggest weakness this season is their front court depth, as Bam has almost had to hold it down single-handedly there, and all things considered, he's done a pretty good job. Next up is the Milwaukee Bucks, and their most underrated player is Brook Lopez. The Bucks are obviously led by Giannis Antetokounmpo, who is an outstanding two-way force and rightfully gets credited for his contributions on both ends, but Brook Lopez is probably the team's most impactful defender and is my personal choice to win this year's Defensive Player of the Year award. Brook has become one of the smartest, most disciplined defenders in the entire NBA, and him making life hell for opponents trying to score in the paint is a big reason why the Bucks are the second-ranked defense this year. Up next, we have the New York Knicks, and their most underrated player is Immanuel Quickley. The Knicks have been a lot better than anybody anticipated this season, and with the addition of Jalen Brunson, who has broken out in a big way, he's gotten a lot of the credit, and rightfully so. But they've also switched up some of their rotations to get Quickley more involved, and as the season has gone on, Quickley has been playing some sensational basketball. In the last 20 games, he's been scoring about 20 points, with a 40-point game and a 38-point game thrown into that mix, and he electrifies the Knicks offense as a spark plug off the bench in their sixth-man role. Next up, we have the Orlando Magic, and their most underrated player is Markelle Fultz. Fultz has been one of the most peculiar cases of a player becoming a draft bust because after going #1 overall, he suffered shoulder injuries that messed up his shot, and after the Sixers gave up on him by shipping him to Orlando, he's been out of the spotlight for a while. But this year, he's putting together a pretty solid season across the board, even without a consistent three-ball in his arsenal. He's incredibly shifty with the ball in his hands, he has such amazing touch around the rim and finishes well inside, and his ability to penetrate and then find the open man has made him a pretty good playmaker, all things considered, and he's continually getting better and better. Next up is the Philadelphia 76ers, and their most underrated player is James Harden. Last season, Harden was looking a step slower than usual, and the narrative became that Harden was washed and over the hill. This season, Harden has not only bounced back in a big way, but he's having the best playmaking season of his career, leading the league in assists, while also shooting the ball as efficiently as he ever has, and yet he was not even named an All-Star. Up next, we have the Toronto Raptors, and their most underrated player is Pascal Siakam. The Raptors have had a weird season where at one point they looked completely out of the hunt, and as the trade deadline approached, everyone assumed that they were going to blow it up, but they kept the gang together, they've rallied pretty hard, and now look like they've got a good chance to sneak into the playoffs, and Siakam's consistency en route to his best season as a pro is a big reason why. Siakam is one of the most slept-on stars in the league right now, but he's super solid on both sides of the ball, and if the Raptors make the playoffs, he could force them to make some noise. And finally, the last team in the East is the Washington Wizards, and their most underrated player is Kristaps Porzingis. Porzingis is scoring more points than he ever has in his career this year, he's shooting the ball more efficiently than he ever has in his career, and he honestly just looks a lot more confident than he ever has in his career. But he's doing it on the Wizards, who are in 11th place, so nobody seems to care about his notable improvement. And with that being said, that's all I have for you today. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment down below which players you think are pretty underrated right now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.